Chapter 16. Revolving. Major Danforth and his men rode on toward dawn, now two to a horse. James slumped against the lancer, in and out of waking. Each time he nodded off, the nightmares tried to consume him. Each time he awoke, he was not sure if he was actually waking or simply falling into another bad dream. It was hard to say which was more terrifying. So he slumped in the saddle and vacillated gently between the two worlds of horror. He awakened on horseback as the lancer reined in sharply. James tried to see what had caused the halt. Lieutenant Hugh, with Durant seated behind him, quietly rode abreast of Sergeant Tremaine and Major Danforth. "We're being followed, Major," Lieutenant Hugh whispered. "How far back?" "4, perhaps 500 yards, sir." "Strength?" "I can't say to a man, but it would seem they have numbers on their side, sir." "Right." The Major considered. He looked to Durant. "Lieutenant, if you will dismount and shelter, we'll lead them on a bit of a steeplechase. Dawn is less than an hour off. If we can keep them on our trail until then, we'll circle back after sunrise." Durant was much more comfortable on horseback, but he understood the logic. "Where do you want us to shelter?" "There's a mill house and farm ahead, just through the trees. We stayed there the night before last. Hide until we lead them past, then perhaps make for the mill house or the barn, whichever seems more sensible." Durant nodded, but did not dismount. Then, in the near distance, he heard what the dragoon had caught wind of, the sound of men running through the woods. "Quickly, Lieutenant. Get to cover before we're seen." Durant dismounted, followed by Finbar and James. A large copse of trees was not far. They ran for it, while the cavalrymen guided their mounts around toward the pursuers, sabres bared. "Straight through them, lads. Don't get caught in the scrum. Straight through at a gallop, then follow me northward." Major Danforth spurred his mount, and the three horsemen charged toward the sounds of the coming horde. Durant, Finn, and James nestled down behind the trees. They heard yells and shrieks as the riders vanished over the ridge, then the clash of battle. It only lasted a few moments. The hollering trailed away as the horde turned in pursuit of the pounding hooves of the chargers. Durant, Finn, and James was dead silent for a long while, none of the men daring to believe in something so gossamer as actual safety. For James, giving himself up to the demons, at least until immolation was involved, had been the safest he felt since the sun set on Good Friday. Sitting in the dark now, waiting for the next band of killers to find him. In some ways this was more terrifying than waiting to be thrown into the flames. There were worse ways to die than by fire. That was certain. What his next set of captors might do to him, he would not let himself imagine that while he was awake. It was right then that he decided the nightmare he was living was not, in fact, better than the nightmares he had been finding in his dreams. At least in the dreams, as horrific, terrifying, and grotesque as they were, he was the one inflicting the horrors, as opposed to having them inflicted upon him. "Let's try to find that farm," said Durant. Finbar nodded. James stood with him, and they followed Durant through the woods. 100 meters on, they broke out of the trees into a wheat field. It stretched out for acres before them, hanging gently in the moonlight, heavy with rainwater, the droplets still glistening on its spears. Beyond the field was a granary, and the little farm's mill house. They could hear the gentle creak of its water wheels spinning and splashing quietly in the stream beside it. Durant led them through the field. Near dead center, they stepped with care past a corpse that had been blown apart by buckshot. The mass of guts, blood, and field-grey wool was barely recognizable as human. They approached the darkened mill house. Durant paused at the door. He listened. The only sounds were the water wheel on its endless revolution and the gentle murmuring of the little rush of water that drove it. Durant turned the knob and opened the mill door. It was pitch black inside, silent. Durant looked at Finn and James. Finn was as ready to bolt as he was to enter. He had no plans to stick it out and fight anything that might be in there, but he was torn by the desire to hide from all the things he knew for certain were stalking the night. He nodded a silent agreement to Durant that entering in was for the best. All the same, he was happy to serve as a rear guard, just in case something was in that darkness waiting for them. Durant stepped through the door. Finn's hand guided James by the small of his back to follow. After the doorway swallowed them both without incident, Finn entered last, shutting the door quietly behind him.